Okay, everybody, welcome to our latest seminar. I should really tell you what number it is, but I must confess, I've forgotten. It's about our 55th seminar, I think, 55th online seminar. So, we welcome this afternoon from, well, in his case, it's the morning, um, Geoff Rayner-Canham from Toronto, Canada. And he's going to tell us a little bit about himself while I'm waiting for a few more people to get in. We're doing very well. We've got 36 so far, and I'm sure there'll be more. Jeff, can you kindly tell everybody a bit about yourself, please?
Yeah. Hi, my career's been at the small Grenfell campus of Memorial University in Newfoundland, and formerly retired, but I'm still teaching by distance, and I've moved to Toronto to escape the winters, and Mally and myself are continuing to work on forgotten women in chemistry, and we've got a book in progress at the time which will be finished and hopefully out next year. And it's amazing that there's still so many who are forgotten and hidden. And one in Hawaii, one in China, one in India, all over the place, Nigeria, and we're putting that together in a series. 15 forgotten women chemists who you should know about and probably don't. So that's something to look forward to. And as I continuing to teach, I love teaching the early courses, particularly chemistry and everyday life. And we have a section each week on how it relates to Inuit life and culture for the far north of Canada. So so that's pretty much it now, Peter.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. That's very interesting. Of course, you gave a talk to us about 2 years ago now about Inuit culture, and very interesting that was too.
Yeah.
In fact, you were teaching your students off the coast of South Africa recently, weren't you?
That's right, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a digital nomad we're called now, where you can be on the ship and teach students all around the world.
Yeah. Okay, Jeff, can you now start to give us your talk, Dying for Work, Dangerous Trade for Women, 1880 to 1970?
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Peter, for inviting Marlene and myself. And I'm always the front person. Marlene does a lot of the work behind the scenes, putting things together, but she she insists I do the talking part. Anyway, so you'll be familiar with some of these, but we've never ever come across them all being strung together in an appreciation of how many women worked in the various dangerous trades over the past pretty much 100 years. So the origins of our talk was that way back in the last century, that we were asked to uh, research and write a book for the American Chemical Society called Women in Chemistry. And in that we did some research on women in industry. And this was sort of like the beginning part. And now I teach this course, Gender Science, Women in Science. And uh, we have a whole week devoted to the story of these women that worked in industry and have been long forgotten. It's sort of like they're in a dead zone. People do women in chemistry, women in physics, but they don't seem to do this crossover area of women in industry. So here we go. The earliest one that we could find was the lead cemeteries, as they were called. And this was the 18th and 19th century. And this is because white lead was ubiquitous for anything in terms of painting. And it was good coverage. It was very bright and white. And in fact, the advertisements, and here's one from earlier in the 20th century, all painting to be done with pure lead paint. This is you're proud of if rather than being contaminated with calcium carbonate. How do you make white lead? Well, start with lead metal. You need acetic acid vapor, carbon dioxide, oxygen, and steam. And it was done in these flower pots. So the lead was rolled into there were sheets rolled up like that. And then uh, here's some of the women with the sheets of the lead on the way to being processed. And then you can see these flower pot things, and they're all stacked up, and then they're put in like a wet oven and left for a while. This was incredibly dangerous work. This is something that was only done by women who were desperate, where they had children, their families, their husbands left them, they had no income, and they worked here and they hoped that the children grew up before they died. So this is a statement from the Time Report of 1903. Here, after a varying degree of exposure, she becomes anemic. Sickness ensues, headaches, growing intensity are developed. These are frequently attended by obscuration of vision or temporary blindness. As the poisoning develops, she is suddenly seized with a convulsion beginning one half of the face, then involving the arm, next the leg of the same side of the body, until the convulsion, violent and purely epileptic form in character, becomes universal. This is attended by a lack of consciousness, out of which she passes into a series of convulsions, gradually increasing in severity, in one of which she dies. There's no hope for these women that once you work in a lead cemetery, it truly is, you're going to die there. But hopefully that your family will have grown up and moved on. It's an incredible self-sacrifice. The pickling girls is one that I think I've never come across elsewhere. And this is the tin plating of iron as corrosion protection. So the sheets are covered in rust, which I've depicted here, and you dip them in baths of concentrated, fairly concentrated sulfuric acid, and the rust is removed as the iron sulfate, and then it's removed, washed, and you have a perfectly clean surface that the tin plating can be done on. So here's one of the women conveying these sheets. And one thing comes up, the strength of these women, because moving these iron sheets around is not lightweight work. And women took on incredibly heavy lifting jobs in all of these careers we talk about. And here's some of the women conveying the iron sheets from the tin plating. Now, in the United States, the great uh, innovator was Alice Hamilton. And she was born in 1869 in New York City, enrolled at the University of Michigan Medical School 1892. On the advice of her professors in fall 1895, she traveled to Germany to study bacteriology and pathology. And this is something astounded Manly and myself. The number of young women scientists who traveled to Germany in the late 1800s, or Germany or Switzerland, where they were able to go to university, but no jumbo jet to get you across. You had to get this ship from New York off to Bremen or somewhere like that, and then you got to travel by train across Germany or down to Switzerland and learn the language on the way. So these are incredibly brave women. And there were so many of them. Nearly a high percentage of the women chemists of the era from Canada and the US went to US to study. She continued postgraduate studies at Johns Hopkins. And in 1897, she accepted offer to become a professor of pathology at the Women's Medical School of Northwest University, Evanston, Illinois. And one of the things that's interesting, there were quite a few women's universities or colleges in the States. And this would enable women to gain professional status they could not do in a regular university, except Alice broke through the barrier. She, she accepted the position of medical investigator for the Illinois Commission on Occupational Diseases. And she's really well known in the US. They even issued, or she devised shoe leather epidemiology as a lovely term. What she meant by that was she actually went into industries. She went on the shop floor. She went into steelworks and wandered around, the only woman and facing a lot of opposition, because she said the only way you understand the diseases is to actually go to where they happen. So she went in places that no women had ever stepped before and against a lot of opposition usually. And the US actually recognized her, and there's a stamp that was issued for her. In 1919, the dean of Harvard Medical School had to convince the board, aghast at the prospect of hiring a woman, I love the terminology, that Hamilton was the best qualified person to join the faculty and assistant professor at Harvard Medical School. That was something. But, and this is a book that she co-authored, so she really was an important factor in the US at the time. And Hamilton agreed on the condition set that she could not attend commencement or football games, nor could she enter the all-male faculty club. And this is a book she subsequently wrote, Exploring the Dangerous Trades. And we'll come back across her name later on in the presentation. Now, in Britain, it was a Scottish woman, Mary Muirhead Patterson, who I don't think has received any recognition. And she was interested in the conditions of employees back again, late 1800s, researched the conditions in Scotland, Canada, and the United States. And in 1893, she and May Tennant, who I can find very little on, were the first two women to be appointed lady inspectors of factories. And there's actually a very good book on the lady inspectors, but Mary Muirhead Patterson definitely deserves as much recognition for her work in Britain as Alice Hamilton got in the United States. The Match Girls, I think a lot of people have heard of. In fact, when we were over in Britain, we're in Harlow, and they actually put on a theatrical performance based on the Match Girls. So this was the white phosphorus matches that were prevalent, the strike anywhere. And this is a picture of the factory in which, or one of the ones in which they worked. So they're made using sticks of wood, twice the length, put 4,000 of these sticks into a frame. Both ends were dipped in sulfur and then to composition of white phosphorus, potassium chlorate, and antimony sulfide, powdered glass, and coloring. Wouldn't allow that in any chemistry lab these days. And after double-ended matches have been dried in ovens, they were placed in a machine to halve them into single matches. And then put into a box of 100 and then into bundles of 12. And then they were sold on the street. And this is a history that's been published on the what transpired. And those who work with white phosphorus develop phosphorus necrosis of the jaw, more commonly called phossy jaw, caused by an inhalation of phosphorus vapor, initially toothaches, flu-like symptoms, tooth loss, abscesses, swelling of the gums, followed by disintegration of the jawbone. Death was reported in about 20% of cases. The company was aware of the danger. If a worker complained of having a toothache, they're told to have the teeth removed immediately or be fired. Annie Besant, a social activist, wrote and published an article on the poor working conditions, including 14-hour workday, poor pay, excessive fines, severe health complications of working with white phosphorus. The angry management tried to get their workforce to sign a paper contradicting it, which they refused to do. And then the worker was dismissed in July 1888, and approximately 1,400 women and girls refused to work by the end of the day. And this is a picture of the strikers and a satirical comment with the caption, "Gallant conduct of the police, heroic attack upon the little matchmakers and match sellers on the Thames embankment." And this is something that came up again during the suffragette movement, that the police with their nightsticks were far more violent against women than when they were against men when there were strikes going on. They deliberately injured the women as much as they could. So there was definitely misogyny involved in it. Here's some of the striking match workers. About 100 women visited Besant to ask for assistance after she'd written this really condemning article. And first she was dismayed because they had no source of income. They were essentially just poverty-stricken then. A lot of publicity, management was firm, but the growing outcry made them nervous. And Besant actively participated in meetings of strikers with management. And the deal was signed. Management accepted all the demands including requirement that meals were to be taken in a separate room where the food could not be contaminated with phosphorus. So this was successful, but we really need to recognize Annie Besant for her work. So here's Annie Besant, born Annie Wood, and she married and then separated. She wrote over 300 books and pamphlets, became a prominent speaker for the National Secular Society, and in 1877 prosecuted for publishing a book about birth control. Spokesman for the Marxist Social Democratic Federation, she became involved with union actions, including the Bloody Sunday demonstration of 1887. And she became involved in politics in India, campaigning for democracy way back in 1914. And she was actually elected as president of the Indian National Congress Party in 1917. And this resulted in India actually issuing a stamp for a British woman in recognition of her work towards India's democracy and independence. As I said before, one of the things is that these ruins seem to have formed between the cracks because all of them I mentioned today really deserve to be remembered. First World War, and it's something that a lot of people don't realize. I didn't until I started getting into this. That for shells, you need two things. You need the explosive that goes in the shell, but you also need a fast explosion to send the shell out. And trinitrotoluene, this yellow stuff, is the stuff that's put in the shells. But for the propellant, it's trinitroglycerine with trinitrocellulose mixture usually, or was in those days, in the First World War. So here's a picture of a young woman filling a shell with trinitrotoluene, the TNT. And the women worked in shifts 24/7 during the First World War. They had 3 shifts, round the clock, every day of the week. And these were called the canary girls because handling the TNT, everything they touched, even chairs and tables, turned yellow. Some had babies born with yellow skin. And over time, the TNT was excreted from their system. And the work doctors, as so often the case, colluded with the authorities, only gave sick notes to those most seriously ill. And here's an image of the women lowering or picking up the shells. And there was one explosive shell factory in East London which blew up. And the authorities covered it up because all the women working there were killed. One of the kitchen cooks expressed her admiration for the canary girls. The girls turn yellow, and then many of them get horrible rashes, and their face swell up, so they are for a day or two quite blind and most repulsive objects. Nevertheless, when they're cured, they go back and run the risk of getting ill again. But the saying was that they were doing their bit for England no matter what the cost to their health. Now, the propellant, these were known as the porridge mixers. And nitric cotton is produced by stirring cotton with a mixture of concentrated nitric and sulfuric acids in large open vats. And here's some of the large open vats. And they're placing the bales of cotton in the cauldrons with the nitric and sulfuric acid to be added to it. And one of the women police officers, and as mentioned, nearly every employment niche was filled by women. The particles of acid land on your face and make you nearly mad, like pins and needles, only much more so. And they land on your clothes and make brown specks all over them. And they rot your handkerchiefs and get up your nose and down your throat and into your eyes. And ether was used as it's called devil's porridge. And to form a smooth paste, ether was added. And as the cords dried, and it's called cordite because they extruded it in the shape of a cord, which throughout the day or night, quite usual for at least a couple of the women to be laying in a coma outside the cordite drying sheds until they regained consciousness and went back to work. But it wasn't all negative. Gretna factory in Scotland was the largest. And the reason it was built in Gretna was it was beyond the reach of the Zeppelins, the German bombers that were coming over. So they wanted to build a place where that was safe from the German attacks. And so Gretna up in the northwest of England was, or on the Scottish borders, was the place to go. So some of the older folk will remember that it was where escaping couples used to go to get married. And some of the morning shift arriving, the scale of things was amazing. Laid railway tracks, they put on trains and built this enormous complex. And yet many of the women were sad to leave at works at war's end. They had a camaraderie, and first time they had 3 large and nutritious meals a day. And they had activities. I mean, the government had put on opera groups and soccer teams and everything. So when they weren't on shift, that they weren't idle. They were actually doing something. And unlike domestic service, which many of them had came from, that had no worries about physical or sexual abuse. And Maud Ellen Bruce was one of the prominent ones. There was a fire in the place, and while everyone else was running out, she ran in and put out the flames. Can you imagine in an explosives factory running in doing that? And she survived. Well, she survived to 101. So, to do that, and again, she's never received any recognition really in the history of the of women in industry. And there've been a couple of books on it. Sadly, because we were contacted about this one after we'd written our first article, we wrote, I think, one of the first articles about this for back in the days for chemistry in Britain, and called the Gretna Garrison, if you go back in history. And anyway, there was one building standing, and a group in Gretna wanted to preserve it. And it wasn't. It was bulldozed down as being not really relevant of any great importance. But since then, there actually is a museum that's been built. And here's some stories, lives of 10 Gretna girls in the Devil's Porridge Museum. So if you're up that way, do go to the Devil's Porridge Museum. The radium girls, I think virtually everyone has heard of, maybe not. Um, and these were the watches and clocks, and I had one with the radium dial. I was very proud of it. I used to hunker down under the covers at night and be able to see the glowing green of the and it wasn't actually the radioactivity, it was the fact that it was a phosphor produced. The zinc sulfides, the green color came from zinc sulfide with the impact of the radiation from the radioactive decay of the radium. And there's since been a very good book on it. And the women used their lips to produce a fine point on their brushes, and in doing so, they ingested the radium compound. At the time, radium was believed to have curative powers. Certainly, Marie Curie pushed it, and Marie Curie, she's referred to as a lady of radium, but there were, like most people, there were dark sides as well. And it was thought it was very healthy to work in a radium paint factory. They would return home after their shift coated in the dust. And at night, they noticed their clothes luminesced, their fingers glowed, and their hair shone in the dark. And there's some accounts of where the young kids used to go in a dark cupboard with one of the radium workers and really laugh at them the way they glowed. And the radium girls actually used to paint their teeth with it, so that their teeth, when they went out dancing, they would actually glow on the dance floor. Grace Fryer was one of the really leading figures in this story. Again, never got much in the way of recognition. She began to lose her teeth at 21 years of age, painful infections, visited the dentist, her jawbone was full of holes, visited several doctors. No one could explain what the problem was. And the company ordered a specialist doctor to visit her and pronounce her healthy, but the individual was not a doctor at all, just a worker at the plant in a white coat. Toxicologist Cecil Drinker, who comes up very well in these stories, determined all the symptoms were radiation related, reported accordingly. However, Alice Hamilton saw the version of Drinker's report the company sent to the government. This stated all employees were in good health, and it was Hamilton who alerted Drinker to the forged rewrite. Countless attorneys turned fire down for attempted lawsuit against US Radium, running scared from the powerful radium corporations. And it was a young lawyer, Raymond Berry, who finally in 1927 accepted their case. And here's a picture of one of the employees. And as it said, with the judge's collusion, the company attempted to drag out the legal proceedings until the women died. And here's from a newspaper clipping from the time. Simple things of life bring most cheer to women who know they will soon die. Victims of radium poisoning keep their faith as death neared. Alice Hamilton notified the most read newspaper columnist in the US about the case. As a result of the subsequent public outcry, the judge reinstated the trial. The women had to testify from their beds and they were too weak to raise their hands to take the oath to testify. And finally, Grace Fryer died and was a headline in the newspaper. 18th radium victim goes to a doom. The sentence of death, their prosaic work imposed on 20 Jersey women, was executed on the 18th, the most famous of them all, yesterday. So that was Grace Fryer. And there's a memorial in Illinois again. She's really been forgotten from history. And also Alice Hamilton and a work, and also Raymond Berry, the lawyer who's so brave to take this on at the risk of his entire career. Now, this is a curious one. The rubber girls making rubber tires using carbon disulfide. And I've still not figured out, and I appreciate the help of any of you watching and listening today, what the role of the carbon disulfide was. This is a very curious story. And this, I think, was taken in the poppy factory. And this is an account of someone who worked there. She sits down in front of the fire whenever she came home refusing food, and that she can only be got to bed by being carried there. While if aroused, she gets wild and excited. All these and other symptoms are the effects attributed to poisoning by bisulfide of carbon. Sometimes the women recovered. In many cases, the effects became more severe. Another report cited symptoms of headache, dizziness, increased weariness in the legs, so that the person experienced great difficulty in walking and especially climbing stairs. This progressed to paralysis of certain nerves, incoordination of muscles, irreversible dementia, and then the victim being condemned to an insane asylum for the rest of her life. Now, I have a personal interest in this because my maternal grandparents lived in Twickenham, Middlesex, as it was at the time. And every so often there'd be this foul smell in the air. And my aunts would say, oh, that's the poppy factory. And one of my aunts actually worked in the poppy factory for a while. And sadly, she developed dementia, but it might well have been, there's a family history on the maternal side of dementia, so it might have been caused that. But apart from this little bit I found on Google, that I can't find anything else apart from the fact its location. There's bits in history of Twickenham as to where it was, but it seems to have just vanished. It's a German company that set up this British subsidiary, but how long it was there and say what exactly the carbon disulfide was doing just seems to have vanished from history. And of course, this usual problem, anything before the internet has vanished. There's no record of it anywhere. But let's say, if any of you have any thoughts on this, I really much appreciate it. Now we move on to the Second World War and the Manhattan Project and the calutron girls. Known in the US, I don't think anyone in Britain has probably ever heard of them. This was separating uranium isotopes for the first bombs using mass spectrometry. And here's one of the women sitting there. And this was huge. I mean, everything was huge involving this, but particulars. And so here's the actual picture inside the factory. And you can see all these women all sitting, doesn't look particularly comfortable, all in a row, controlling these dials and told what they have to values they have to read constantly and adjust the dials so that everything is within the parameters that they've been told to follow. And they sat on high stools for 8-hour shifts, 7 days a week, monitoring gauges, adjusting knobs to keep the needles where they're supposed to be in recording and the readings. We all, as one of them said, we all wore little fountain pen-sized dosimeters. Part of signing out a plant was to check the amount of radiation that you had absorbed every day. And there's 3 books have come out on it. The Girls of Atomic City, Atomic Women, and finally the Day in the Sun, which emphasizes more the academic women that worked rather than the women that worked in the calutrons. And I want to highlight here someone who has been forgotten in the West, but is very well known in China. This is Joan Hinton. And she was recruited while still a graduate student, absolutely brilliant physicist. So we're veering off into physics from chemistry. When the first atomic bomb was detonated, Hinton and a colleague, dodging army patrols, rode a motorcycle to a small hill about 25 miles from the blast point to witness the event. So you could tell she was very strong-willed and Hinton thought the bomb would be used for a demonstration explosion to force a Japanese surrender, and it was not to be. And she felt really devastated, and it really affected her for the rest of her life, that the lives that were lost from something she'd worked on. And the heat from the nuclear explosion melted the desert sand into glassy globules. Hinton sent samples of this classified desert sand to mayors of every major city in the US together, a note asking whether they wanted their cities to suffer the same fate in a nuclear war. And this didn't go down well, of course. Most of her subsequent life was spent in rural, poverty-stricken communities in China, where Hinton applied her scientific talents to perfecting a continuous flow automatic milk pasteurizer and other machines to improve the life and health of the community. In 1966, she put up a large public poster in Beijing complaining that she and her family were given extra food allowances. She insisted the hardships suffered by ordinary Chinese people should also be inflicted upon her own family. Her children didn't agree, of course. This poster came to the attention of then President Mao Zedong, who ordered that her wishes be acted upon. And she's become quite a recognized figure in China. And this was a billboard in Beijing celebrating the 100th anniversary of Hinton's birth. Plutonium hazards, 1960s and 1970s. And this relates to a factory in the States run by Kerr-McGee, a private corporation. And at Kerr-McGee simum fuel fabrication site, the workers compressed radioactive and toxic uranium and plutonium powders into pellets, packed them into tubes for insertion into nuclear reactors for power production. You can see an image of them working there. Upon leaving a shift, the workers had to pass through radiation detectors as a result of poor safety controls common for contaminated workers to set off the alarm, at which point they were rushed by hazmat clothed teams to a high-pressure shower where they were stripped naked and scrubbed down, and really scrubbed down with hard brushes, and water was splashed, the eyelids were lifted and water splashed into their eyeballs. So this is a horrible fate. And this brings us to Karen Silkwood. She grew up in Netherlands, Texas, and studied medical technology at Lamar State College in Beaumont, Texas. Married young, had 3 children, separated from a very abusive husband, and he insisted on keeping the children. She was destitute, so she applied for a grant working in the Kerr-McGee plant. She was elected to Union Bargaining Committee and with a background in medical technology assigned to investigate health and safety issues. Cutting the story very short, she assembled documentation of her claims of safety violations. A New York Times journalist was interested in her story. She arranged to meet the reporter, and a colleague later testified that she had a binder and a packet of documents with her before she drove to the meeting in her intact Honda Civic. Later that evening, she was found dead in a crashed car. There were no documents in the vehicle. The police said it was a single vehicle accident. She'd fallen asleep at the wheel and rammed the car into a bridge abutment. And you can see for yourselves, the back of the vehicle was severely damaged, and the police just ignored that. But the police, of course, was a local police department who had close ties to the Kerr-McGee factory. Uh, there's been several books, but particularly this one is a good version of the story. And she was voted one of the 50 most influential baby boomers, and you can see her image down here. That Life magazine really thought that her work on promoting nuclear safety or making the country aware of how unsafe these nuclear plants were deserved a place in this compilation. Now, as many of you know, that a movie was produced on it, but it was a travesty of justice because it portrayed her as this gum-chewing, uneducated hick, when in fact she had, as I mentioned before, a strong qualification in medical technology at school. She came first in chemistry. She was an educated, very, very bright woman, not the way she was portrayed at all. And it really devalued her very existence. But what was even more astounding was when they produced the subsequent DVD, the second version. Look at the cover. It looks as if it's a story about Kurt Russell, and nothing, and that where the Meryl Streep, the Silkwood character, is simply like a hanger-on devotee of Kurt Russell. This was just staggering that they should have done that. And anyway, so that's the stories put together, strung together with some horrible tales of work women have done in the past, and some very brave women who've attempted to do something about it. And just to mention it, particularly Marlene, and we got recognition from the ACS back in 2007, and we both got real recognition in 2023 by the History Division of the American Chemical Society, where they flew us to San Francisco, had a whole day's symposium on our work over the decades, and a lovely dinner as well. Flew back again. So, thank you again for listening to me, watching my slides, and as you can see in the cover one, there's the 5 women who have highlighted in this particular saga. So, thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Peter, for allowing me, Marlene, to do this.
Well, thank you very much, Geoff, for that. Thank you very much, Geoff, for a very, very interesting talk. There's one particular sort of thing that strikes me, and that is that it's interesting how nearly every case you've given there of a dangerous trade involving women, there's been a book written about it.
Yes, yes.
I don't think I've come across a case before where every single aspect of a topic has been associated with the book. It must be quite useful in a way, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Funnily enough, it was putting together this talk which forced us to look for some of these with no idea that there were actually publications on the porridge girls, for example. But yes, but no one's. It's like, oh, this is really bad, like the radium workers. But there's a pattern here. Women had to do this dangerous work, and there was so many of these tasks which were done. So just saying, "Oh, the radium girl is horrible," da, 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 da. Yeah, but you really need to see it in context. This has gone on for a long, long while, and then there are these brave women in every case who've done something about it at risk to their life and their health.
Yes. You mentioned carbon disulfide. Now, since we've been sort of online everywhere, there's been some discussion between some of us what the role of carbon disulfide was, and it appears to be connected to the vulcanization of rubber, but not directly. Now, I've seen two possible explanations of that. I personally have seen it as a solvent for rubber. So in other words, instead of vulcanizing it directly with sulfur, you use a solvent of rubber in carbon disulfide. Someone else, John Bevis, have found a reference in Pfizer, but talked about carbon disulfide as an accelerator system for rubber vulcanization, which I guess could be more or less the same thing in the sense that a
Yeah.
solvent of rubber would be quicker than a solvent of sulfur rather would be quicker than sulfur itself as a solid. Although rubber dissolves in carbon disulfide, so I don't quite know how you balance
Yes.
balance the two. So it does sound a bit mysterious. In fact, there is some suggestion that carbon disulfide has been used for recycled tires because it dissolves both the rayon cord and the rubber. But I don't know. It seems it might be an accelerant in the vulcanization process. Um, Talking of carbon disulfide, were there a lot of women working in the rayon industry? Because of course, rayon is a
Well,
major.
that's right. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Have you got anything on that?
No, that's a good point. No, never researched that. That's another one to
There's
add
a
to.
very good book. There's a very good book on the subject. I'm not sure how far it deals with women
Yeah,
workers, but it's
yeah.
called it's by LeBlanc. It's by a chap called LeBlanc, who's written several books on industrial problems, called Fake Silk.
Okay.
So if you look up LeBlanc fake silk, it goes into great detail about the harmful effects of rayon production. So if there's any connection with women there, I think you would mention it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, One other thing I was going to mention, just very briefly, I haven't had any other questions. I'm the only person asking questions here. If anybody does have any questions, please put them in quickly and chat. And that is May Tennant. You mentioned very early in the talk, May Tennant
Yeah.
was one of the
Yeah.
first women infected. Was she in fact a member of the Tennant family?
I really don't know. That's a good point.
I mean, it'd be curious, a case of a poacher becoming a gamekeeper, almost, you could say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I could she very little. I couldn't find anything much on her. I should go through. We should go through this book on the lady inspectors. I'm sure she's got more than a simple entry in that.
Yes, I mean, it seemed a little bit suspicious, but anyway.
Yeah.
Um, okay. Somebody else had mentioned organic solvent as accelerant for vulcanization. So it clearly seems to have some sort of process as an accelerant or an enabler of vulcanization. But perhaps with that hint, Jeff, you can go away and look into carbon disulfide in more detail.
Yeah. But it's interesting what we used to accept as say visit my maternal grandparents, and the air absolutely stank, and people say, "Oh, it's the wind, the wind direction from the poppy factory." Oh, that's the way it is. And now, I mean, it would just never be acceptable.
Yes, it's interesting. According to John Nicholson, who happened to live in Twickenham, it was established in 1932 and went into liquidation in 1950, so it certainly wasn't long-lived. Maybe the smell had something to do with it.
Yeah. Well, part of
And
it,
when would you be going to Twickenham? What period?
or that would be the 1950s, 1950s and 1960s.
That's
Oh,
curious
well,
because apparently it
that's
went into
interesting.
liquidation in the 1950s.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
somebody else took over the factory.
yeah. Or maybe, I mean, I have very poor memory of dates, and so I do. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
It
that
wasn't.
worked.
It was. Yeah, but it was
Anyway,
probably.
so I think with that collaborative effort on our part on the case of proper um, the use of carbon disulfide, we should draw this very interesting talk to a close. Thank Geoff once more, as always, for a fascinating talk on women and chemistry.
Okay.
And I
Thank
hope
Marlene as well. Marlene, the patient
this
worker
guy,
behind the scenes who delves into archives with great enthusiasm.
you're quite right, Geoff. I should also thank Marlene as well, and please give us her thanks, our thanks for her bearing that. Anyway, thank you everybody for coming along. Next month, we're having a talk by Tony Travis, who's spoken to us before, on the subject of green hydrogen. Now, this is obviously connected to work on the high pressure ammonia industry because they need lots of hydrogen to produce ammonia. And some of you may recall that when they cut down on producing ammonia a few years ago because of the cost, it meant there was a sudden crisis because there was no carbon dioxide, ironically, to be distributed to the food industry. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. And I do hope you will join us next month for another fascinating talk, this time on green hydrogen. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Goodbye for now, and goodbye, Jeff.